Welcome to a historic walking tour of the residential section of Russellville, Kentucky. This tour has been a feature of the annual Tobacco and Heritage Festival, usually held each fall. I'm Evelyn Richardson, a lifelong resident of Logan County, retired from a career as regional librarian. I have a deep appreciation for our history and those persons who have preserved it for us to enjoy. Kentucky became a state in 1792, and Logan County was formed later that same year. Russellville is the county seat. As was true of many small towns, there was a town square with businesses surrounding a park. Russellville's park has always been a center of activity and remains a gathering place for events or just relaxing by the fountain. Concerts that are often a part of the festival take stage there. Shoppers park their cars around the park years ago, as well as along the streets. A snow scene gives a good view of Main Street. It has come a long way from a dirt buffalo trail that led to a big spring that came out of the ground at what is now 2nd and North Main. The spring provided the water supply for the early settlers, also giving the town its name for a while, Big Boiling Spring. When cars came along, a fence and a sidewalk that encircled the park were removed, and the size of the park was shrunk somewhat to allow more space for parking. One of my favorite photographs is one made in 1917, Mule Day on the square. Officially, it was called First Monday on the calendar. People came to town on horseback or in their horse-drawn vehicles to shop and trade and transact business and tend to legal matters. It was a festival atmosphere on First Monday. On the extreme right of the picture stood the Gray Hotel. Moving left, the newspaper building. At the edge of the crowd is a striped pole indicating a barber shop was in that row of buildings. On the west side are the post office, a restaurant, the Dixie Theater Picture Show, and the Forest House Hotel on the left. Behind these buildings, you can see the dome of the courthouse, built in 1904. Before that time, the 1826 courthouse stood on the north end of the park. Until then, court was held in what was known as the Cedar House on the east edge of town. The buildings on the south side of the square have changed occupants many times. Here, the police department is on the far right, next to City Hall, and a dry cleaning establishment is next door to it. Then comes the big red structure on the corner of Main and the square that we know as the Harrison HITE building. Constructed about 1887 by Carter Harrison, it was home to a casket factory, grocery store, furniture store, and the upstairs was rented to boarders for a while. In the mid-1920s, W.T. HITE converted the corner of the lower level into a service station, the first one in Russellville. It sold Standard brand and was said to be the finest station between Louisville and Nashville. Today, this is home to the Chamber of Commerce and the Office of Logan Economic Alliance for Development. We will leave the park area now and begin our walk toward the residential area of town. But first, see if you can picture in your mind a small pond in the park for watering the horses, and a stray pen that held livestock that often escaped the backyards of people's homes in town. Today, a number of markers and monuments in the park pay tribute to people in our history. To mention a few, John Littlejohn, outstanding preacher. Our connection to the Meriwether Lewis of the Lewis and Clark explorers, and Alice Allison Dunnigan, nationally recognized African-American teacher, civil rights leader, and newspaper journalist. Be sure to visit the park in person and read all the markers. On the west side of the square, we will go by a two-story building that has been home to hardware stores most of its existence. In the 1970s, it was restored to house publishing of the News Democrat and Leader newspaper. The one-story building on the corner was another service station, this one a Gulf station. Now it is a law office. As we head west on 4th Street, we come to the Clark building, today the law office and residence of Attorney Joe Grant Clark. Here, the Confederate Convention met in 1861 to form a government for the Confederate state of Kentucky. Although this event is a big piece of our history, this separation never did come to pass. The center section of what we see today was the original house built by cabinet maker Englishman William Forrest around 1820. His cabinet shop was a separate building to the left. The building had a porch at one time, as seen in our slides. Part of it served as a funeral home that had several owners over the years. Clark, Thurman, Richardson. This photo shows the right wing that was added. It extends south as well, down Winter Street. Across 4th Street from the Clark building, we see the 1904 courthouse. After the Logan County Justice Center was built in 2010, it is referred to as our historic courthouse. It houses some of the governmental offices and the Tourism Commission, and its courtroom is used for public meetings. An old photo shows the original architecture. At the very top is a weather vane in the shape of a fish. It was saved from the earlier courthouse in the park on the square. During various roof changes, the weather vane was lost and a replica was made, the one we see today on the historic courthouse. However, the original was later found in storage and is now preserved. It bears several bullet holes. Legends attribute them to Jesse James or a drunken Civil War soldier. Locals say that we'll never know for sure because lots of boys in town would use it for target practice. The new 2010 Justice Center is on the next block west. The old jail near the historic courthouse houses Logan County Archives and the Genealogical Society that manages the old records. When it was a jail, the family lived there too, the jailer and his family, as evidenced by the rocking chair on the porch. Large stones from a previous jail on the east side of town were saved and used in building the cells. Across from the historic courthouse, on the corner of West 4th and Winter Streets, stood the Russellville Post Office. It was built with labor and funds through the Works Progress Administration, WPA for short. It was in 1935, during the Great Depression, that it was put up. In the basement was the Agriculture and Homemaker Extension Service. Today, this area provides parking for the current post office, built in 1984. A car dealership previously occupied its location. On Winter Street, just behind the Clark building, was once a COCA-COLA bottling plant. A later photo shows their sign, "Drink Coca-Cola in bottles." You could watch them pass the window on a conveyor belt after they were capped. The plant had a contract with Fort Campbell during World War II that helped it to be a thriving industry. It's interesting that today Logan County's largest industry, Logan Aluminum, produces more than half of the sheet aluminum used in making soft drink cans. Across Winter Street is the Tom Ray Armory, referred to locally as the Old Armory, because a new one is located on Armory Drive. This one on Winter Street was built by the WPA also. Today it houses the City Parks and Recreation Department. Tom Ray, for whom it was named, was a political leader in those years, instrumental in getting money for buildings and roads. Ray Football Stadium is also named for him. The Sacred Heart Catholic Church was built in the early 1960s. The original frame church was on the north corner of the same block. Irish workers who were laying the L&N Railroad through Russellville helped to build it during their off hours. Stained glass windows made in Logan County by Strickler Glass Company were added in 1990. They are a significant feature of the newer brick church. The right of the building was once a Catholic school. The First Presbyterian Church faces 6th Street, originally named College Street because it led directly to the campus of Bethel College for Men on the west side, where Bethel Shopping Center is today. Logan College for Women was to the east. And an earlier Presbyterian church was on Blakey Street, and it was near Bethel College. During the Civil War, it was used as a hospital for Confederate soldiers and ultimately was burned by Union soldiers. Sometime after the present church was built, the U.S. government contributed to its funding to somewhat compensate for this act. To the west on 6th Street is an outstanding example of Queen Anne architecture in a home. Built in the late 1800s, it was also once used as a school and infirmary of osteopathy. Judge W.P. Sandidge was one of its several owners. On the south side of 6th Street is the DeGraffenried building, erected in 1967 for the Logan County Public Library. The library moved to a new facility on Armory Drive in 2014, where there is ample space and parking. The DeGraffenried building was so named because Thomas P. DeGraffenried had willed nearly $1 million to the city of Russellville in the 1960s for the education of the people therein. Some of these funds were used to match state and federal grants for it to be constructed to house a public library, certainly an educational institution. Schools and many other groups have benefited from this generous gift. The Senior Citizen Center and related offices are here now. We will see Mr. DeGraffenried's boyhood home as we continue this tour. The first Christian church on the corner of 7th and Winter was organized in 1841. They met in homes and other locations for 30 years before their church was built in 1871. We mentioned College Street earlier. At one time, all streets in Russellville were named, no numbered streets. 7th was named Cedar, perhaps because there was a lot of cedar trees along it, but more likely because it led directly east to a large structure called the Cedar House. It served as an overnight tavern and the place where court cases for all Western Kentucky were held in earlier years, before we had our courthouse in the square. The lot where the church stands was originally the location of Major Richard Bibb's own private blacksmith shop. We will see Major Bibb's home coming up soon. The residence west of the church was the home of a Dr. H.T. Loving and the William J. Morton family. His family were highly respected citizens in the county. He was a close friend of Governor John Breathitt from Russellville and conducted the governor's funeral service in 1834. In the 20th century, it was the home of Eugene Flowers, who served as Kentucky's Commissioner of Agriculture. Continuing south on Winter Street, we see the Slaughter and the DeGraffenried house. Thomas Slaughter was a Kentucky state senator. He married a daughter of Major Bibb, who lived across the street and who provided the lot for the house to be built. Later, it was the boyhood home of Thomas P. DeGraffenried, who willed the $1 million to Russellville, as we've mentioned. His father was a druggist, and he was an industrious boy. He painted fences for people all over town. He got a good education and ultimately became wealthy as a lawyer in New York. At the back of this lot still stands one of the several private schools that were in Russellville before public education became widespread. Perhaps it, along with Bethel College that he attended, influenced Mr. DeGraffenried to leave his wealth for the purpose of education in the town that has valued the importance of education for generations. A recent remodeling removed the front porch. Major Richard Bibb is among our most outstanding citizens whom we remember. A Revolutionary War officer, he was given a land grant in Logan County after the war. He first settled at Echo Valley near Auburn in 1799, and he established Bibb's Chapel Church in that area. When his wife died and he remarried, he built his stately townhouse here. It is now part of the Sikh Museum, Struggles for Emancipation and Equality in Kentucky. Major Bibb was educated for the Episcopal ministry, but changed to Methodism, perhaps influenced by the Great Revival, the Second Great Awakening that began in Logan County and reached its peak in 1800. He gave a lot to build a Methodist church on land that he owned just below Race Stadium. He owned much farmland and had slaves to work it, as was the culture of the times. He knew in his heart that slavery was wrong and offered them freedom to return to Africa long before the Emancipation Proclamation. 29 accepted his offer, and he paid their way. For the others, he gave land and money to help them get started on their own at his death in 1839. The community of Bibbtown still exists west of town. We must mention that his son, John Bibb, lived and worked in Frankfort, Kentucky. His hobby was experimenting in his greenhouse, and it was he who developed Bibb lettuce that bears his name that we enjoy eating in our salads. Another son, George, was Chief Justice of the Kentucky Supreme Court and a U.S. Senator, and was a member of President John Tyler's cabinet. 3 cousins of President George Washington came to Logan County and settled. One was John Whiting Washington, who built his home on 9th Street, known as High Street in the early years because it was of the highest elevation in town. This once served as a bed and breakfast. The Christian Orndorff and Samuel Caldwell House was built by Orndorff in 1820. Both families were among the first businessmen and leaders in this community. An earlier photo shows that it has been well cared for over the years. This pretty yellow house at 9th and Main was once the home of John J. Crittenden, one of the 4 men from Russellville who have served as governor of Kentucky. And all 4 of their homes are still standing. Crittenden studied law, served in the Kentucky legislature and the U.S. Congress, was Attorney General under 3 presidents, and came home to Kentucky to be governor in 1848. He's best remembered in history for writing the Crittenden Compromise, which attempted to prevent the Civil War. It failed by only 2 votes. 2 of his sons ended up in the war. George fought for the South, Thomas for the North. They both were in the Battle of Shiloh, but both lived to return home. A Kentucky historical marker in the yard tells his story. As you travel through the city and the county, you will see many of these markers that relate our important and interesting history. This lovely gray house began as a 2-room log house built around 1811 by Judge William Wallace, 2nd Judge of Logan County Circuit Court. It once served as a tavern and a stagecoach inn, thus its current name, Stagecoach Inn, operated now as a bed and breakfast. In 1822, the property was acquired by an Augustine Byrne, spelled B-Y-R-N-E. His son was in a line of 4 generations of Doctors Walter Byrne, who practiced medicine in Russellville for around 150 years. An earlier photo gives us a view from a different angle. The handsome O'Bannon House takes its name from its builder, Presley O'Bannon. He was in the U.S. Marine Corps during the Barbary Wars and was stationed on a ship in 1805 in the Mediterranean Sea, just off the shore of Tripoli, now Libya. Pirates of North Africa were holding 180 American seamen for ransom. He bravely went ashore to the town of Derna and planted the U.S. flag on a rock wall. This was the first time the U.S. flag was planted on foreign soil. The Marine hymn refers to this incident in the line, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. He came here around 1811 after his service and built this house. He launched a political career based on his heroism and was elected to the Kentucky legislature. Richard Bibb Jr., grandson of Major Bibb, later owned the house and added the front section. The historical marker in front was erected rather recently in 1969. Representatives of the Marine Corps were here and conducted a special dedication ceremony. The ornate Victorian red brick house across Main from the abandoned house was built by C. Wynn Courts, a banker in the late 1800s. It has 5 floors and a number of distinctive architectural features. A local brick mason named Daniel Mosley helped to construct it, as well as several other nice buildings in town. In the 1970s, its owner was Al Smith, noted newspaper editor and publisher and widely recognized journalist. He oversaw an extensive restoration of the house. He can be praised for his strong public support of preserving all facets of Logan County's history. Moving toward downtown on Main Street, we see the Morehead House at the corner of 7th and Main. Armistead Morehead was Russellville's first postmaster and father of James T. Morehead, another of the 4 governors of Kentucky. We are told there was once a narrow crawl space tunnel that ran from this house underneath Main Street to the Edwards Atkinson house across the street from it. It is believed this tunnel was a part of the Underground Railroad. This house, built by Presley Edwards around 1820, has had several owners. An ad in the local newspaper in 1947 states that it sold for $14,650, an indication of the inflation rate since then. An admired feature is the outside circular stairway that was added in later years. The United Methodist Temple was extensively remodeled in 1917 to look like it does today. It encases a red brick building with a steeple that was built on this site in 1854. An earlier church stood below the stadium, as we said. The congregation is the oldest in Russellville, having been organized in 1808. As with many churches, probably it was an outgrowth of the 1800 Great Revival, or Second Great Awakening, as it is referred to in American history books. The revival began here in Logan County and spread throughout the Southeast. When the church was being remodeled, a newspaper man came by to write an article about the project and remarked it looked like a temple with its columns and beautiful stained glass windows. The name stuck, but its meaning is no different than that of all of United Methodist churches. The name stuck, but its message is no different from that of all United Methodist churches. The red brick house across Main from the church is called the Browder Wagoner House. It was built by Wilbur Browder, a lawyer who worked for the L&N Railroad. Leslie Wagoner served in the Civil War and later lived here while he was president of Bethel College for 10 years. He left in 1883 to become president of the University of Texas in Austin. Other faculty of Bethel College boarded in the house too. An older photo gives us a view from the south side. 2 doors down on 7th Street to the west is a house built in 1814. It has been owned by the Coffman family since 1865. Reverend Edward Coffman Sr. wrote the book, The Story of Logan County, in 1962, and his son, Ed Jr., updated it in 2002, entitled it, Through My Father's Eyes. This is a comprehensive history of Logan County that we're so grateful to have. Both father and son, both deceased, were ministers in the Christian church. As we continue to move toward the downtown square, we pass the Episcopal Parish House, a beautiful example of shingle-style architecture. Next door is the Trinity Episcopal Church, built around 1891. Notice the original cast iron fence with acorn motifs at the top. Many of the houses in Russellville had iron fences, but during World War I, they were taken by the government to make armaments for the war. However, the government did not insist that churches give up theirs, and this one remains. A section of the fence on the side of the church is made to be removable, so caskets for a funeral could be more easily brought into the sanctuary. Diagonally across South Main from the Episcopal Church is First Baptist. It replaced one built before 1820. People comment that the architecture greatly resembles the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, longtime home of the Grand Ole Opry. An earlier picture shows it without a steeple, added only in 2007. Have you realized that on and around just one block, we have seen 6 churches, all built in the 1800s? When Logan County was the frontier, as the population moved west, it was known as Rogues Harbor and the Devil's Campground because of so many thieves and robbers in the area. Thankfully, upright citizens came along and changed that reputation. East of the Baptist Church on 6th Street is the Samuel Caldwell House, built in 1820. General Caldwell was the town's first merchant, and he held several positions in governmental leadership. In the later 20th century, the house was converted into a funeral home. Across 6th Street is the Andrews House, built even earlier in 1810. Cedar logs from a school that sat on the site were used as part of the foundation. The wooden exterior resembles cut stone in the style of Mount Vernon. At one time, it is reported that the house sold for only $125 and a mayor. No doubt the most famous building in Russellville is the old Southern Bank of Kentucky. It was once featured on the HGTV program If Walls Could Talk because of its Italian-style architecture. It was built around 1857 by George Norton for both his residence on the right and a bank on the left side. It was here that the infamous Jesse James gang pulled off their first planned robbery in 1868. A reenactment of the robbery is a regular feature of the Tobacco and Heritage Festival. The structure has been well kept and continues to be a residence. The front room of the bank section was home to the public library for 20 years, from 1947 to 1967, when it was moved to the new DeGraffenried building. Next door to the bank building is an older home, that of Dr. Walter Jones, Russellville's first doctor. Have you noticed small oval plaques on homes and buildings? They're all over town, giving the construction date of each one. As we come near the square, we can look east on 5th Street and see the home of Governor John Breathitt. A historical marker in front of the house gives his history. He's buried on land that was his farm near the North Bypass. There's a monument to him in Maple Grove Cemetery here, and another in a cemetery in Frankfort. The building was home for the politically prominent Ray family for a number of years and was bought by the Women's Club for a community meeting house. It is now owned by the Rotary Club. Near Main Street is a matching building that was Governor Breathitt's office. The second floor was added later. It is now used as a residence. Back on the corner of Main and 5th Streets is the Opera House. Built in 1903, it accommodated traveling shows and local recitals, and shops and businesses were on the ground floor, and a wide center staircase led to the second floor, which had a stage, boxes, balcony, and dressing rooms. The ticket window is still at the head of the stairs, although the back part of the second floor was removed when the firehouse was built behind. The Opera House is now owned by the city of Russellville, and offices are on the first floor. An earlier photo shows that it has stood the test of time well. In 1912, Arthur Mitchell started a picture show in the Opera House. He moved to different locations, the last being on East 4th Street, and operated movie theaters for 40 years in Russellville. Thank you for watching this virtual historic walking tour through a few blocks of residential Russellville. Be sure to check out a similar virtual tour that takes you around the square and north through the business section.